welcome to the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Schugnecht, and today's guest is Mary Fran Bontempo. Her book is From Broken to Brilliant, and she has an amazing story. So let's get into it. Hi, Mary Fran. Thank you so much for joining me on the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I would love to just start out with having you introduce yourself, if you would.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. I mean, you and I chatted a bit before all of this came to be, and we were both on the Yay Smart Women bandwagon. So I am very happy to be here. I am Mary Fran Bontempo. I am an author. I am a speaker. I'm the co-founder of Brilliantly Resilient. I've written, I think this is my sixth book. So there's a lot going on, and it's just a delight to be able to share that with you and your audience. So thank you.
Yeah, so brilliantly resilient. It has me at the title, right? I love the title. So tell me about this book. This podcast is all about beyond the bestseller, meaning your book, you didn't necessarily write it to be a bestseller. You had a message that you wanted to share. So I'd love to hear more about what that message of brilliantly resilient is.
So I think to try to hit a couple of different segments of your audience here, I think all of us have a story. And that is where most of my type of writing comes from. So it's nonfiction in the sense that it's based on my personal experiences. Um, and again, everybody has a story, everybody has a story that they want to tell. It's it's not always easy to put those stories into words, but at the same time, I always find that when you lead with your heart, the best of you follows. So there's a lot of heart in the things that I write. This book is about, I'm holding up, as I said to you, I don't even have my own copies yet. This is still the
Hot off the
test copy,
presses.
but From Broken to Brilliant, a number of years ago, a partner and I started Brilliantly Resilient because both of us have had to deal with what we called sucker punches and train wrecks in our lives. For me, it was dealing with my son's substance abuse and ultimately
Hmm.
his heroin addiction, which I found out on Mother's Day of 2010 that he was a heroin addict when he
Wow.
overdosed on a painkiller that he had stolen because he couldn't get from his grandmother because he couldn't get his hands on heroin that day. So the long and the short of it is we were at my brother's house celebrating Mother's Day. I had gone into another room of the house and I heard a lot of commotion coming from the room I had just left and went back in to find my son shaking uncontrollably on the couch.
Ugh.
Um, and I'm saying, stop that. And he's saying, I can't. At which point we call the paramedics and they keep asking him what he took, what he took, what he took. And I'm thinking, he's having a seizure. Like, get him into the ambulance. Well, it turns out that he did take something that he had stolen, as I said. It ended up being acetaminophen, very high content of acetaminophen in this painkiller that he took. So, first of all, the doctor tells me he's a heroin addict. Then the doctor tells me that unless they can counteract this drug that he took, he's going to need a liver transplant
Oh my
if
gosh.
he lives. This is one of those before and after moments. Everything stops when you're in that moment,
Oh
and your
yeah.
kid's life is on the line. So I'm going to fast forward ahead here and say that we ended up getting him into treatment. But that was it. I'm giving you little sentences for a very long and arduous process, which ended up becoming brilliantly resilient
Mhm.
because I had to really dig deep and find the most basic parts of myself, find my resilience, find what mattered to me, which was my value system and what was important. And after all of that was over with, and by over with, I mean we got through the crisis part of it, I realized that I had been working a process, working a system, that when my partner and I got together, we realized we had both been working. She has two sons that were born blind.
Hmm.
And we both realized that there was a process that was teachable in here. And that became brilliantly resilient, which is now detailed step by step by step in From Broken to Brilliant, how to live a brilliantly resilient life.
Wow. So I had chills all over when you were telling that story because as a mother, I'm like, the thing that I don't know, equated that to was my daughter had a medical situation, which we
Hmm.
thought was her having a seizure. So when you said that, I was like, I know exactly that feeling where like I literally could not even in that moment think about how to get from where we were to where the hospital was. Like I could, my brain stopped working and I,
That whole out of body that people say you have an out of body experience, and
yep,
that's what it is. Because
yep,
you're like, I don't know what to do. This is happening to somebody else.
yeah, yeah. So I totally understand, except, you know, saying that like I can feel that, I'm also like, it turned out it was a very minor situation that just seemed like a bigger deal at the time. And also when I saw the title of your book, I was equating that to like my own situation of like losing a job and starting a business and whatever. And now I just feel like, oh my gosh, my problems are like so minor compared to what you had gone through. So I'm curious about kind of, the who that book is for, and do you have to have had like some major life experience like that?
I am so glad that you said this because what ended up happening was that I continued to use the process almost unconsciously after the crisis stopped. Like after that crisis was kind of, I don't want to say resolved because, but it was well on its way to being navigated and managed. But what ended up happening was I was like, geez, this works for a lot of stuff. This whole idea of how to tap into your resilience and use your brilliance with these transferable skills that you develop and
Mm-hmm.
recognize that have a place in all the parts of your life. It doesn't have to be a crisis. I always say sometimes it's just chronic low level stress, that being pecked to death by chickens feeling like it's this constant thing. But if we learn how to utilize, and the first part of this process is where you reset. So you utilize your values, you examine your perception, and then you control the controllables. That works for everything,
Wow.
everything. So it really is a system that is utilizable, a word, as the writer, is utilizable a word. It's able to be utilized in like virtually any situation.
Mm.
And when you move forward in it too, you realize that one of the big things I talk about is taking imperfect action. Because at some point, you have to realize there's not a single thing you can do in this world that is going to be perfect.
Yeah.
Not one. So if you're waiting for that, you're never going to get anything done. So the second part of it, where you rise, is all about how to use imperfect action and those transferable skills. And again, applicable to anybody in any situation.
Sure. Well, sounds like an amazing book, and I definitely want to check it out. So you have that proof copy. So has it actually been published? It's
It
out and
is. It's
available? Okay.
published. It's online. It's on Amazon right now. I'm just waiting to get author copies to me so that I can get them out to people. So it is absolutely available on Amazon. And as I said, I mean, I started from this with a major crisis in my life. It's certainly applicable for that because sometimes you need to stop. You just need, and as you and I both know, those crises do stop you in your tracks. You're stopped.
Mhm.
There's no clear path in your head as to what to do next. So working a process, which is one of the other things that I wanted. Like everybody always tells you, well, you have to tap into your resilience. Oh, okay. Well, thanks. How do I
Yeah.
do that? You
Yeah.
know, um, the good news is we're born with it. We're born with our resilience. I always say babies fall an average of 17 times an hour when they're learning to walk, and they get up again
Yeah.
and they don't think about it. They just
Yeah.
do it.
Keep
But
going.
so that's that inherent resilience that we have. What they also don't think about is the shame of failure. And we're going to fail a lot of times when we tap into our resilience. It's just part of the process of learning.
Yeah.
So if you can, that's when we have to start looking for our resilience again. When it becomes attached to shame and we don't try because we don't want to fail, well, put that at, you failed already. Lots of times. You've already looked stupid. Lots of times. That ship sailed. Move on.
Yeah.
So when we recognize those things, then it becomes easier to say, okay, you know what? I'm probably going to screw this up more than once by not making the perfect decision,
Right.
taking the perfect action step because it doesn't exist. But if you can get beyond that mentally and just do something or do nothing, that's another option. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. But mentally, we have to be intentional. And by intentional, I mean recognize that there's going to be some failure along the way. You don't get a big solution to a big problem, it comes in little steps,
Yeah.
and you just take a step.
Yep. Absolutely. Again, not to like, my problems are I mean not problems, but what I'm dealing with is nothing compared to that. But I will say when I was laid off, that kind of is what led me to this podcast, to the
Hmm.
business I decided to launch. And it was like each day it was like a new decision or a new, it was like such a step by step process. I didn't know on day one that this is where I was going to be 6 weeks later, but it just kind of step by step kept coming together, and it was up because I was just open to it the whole time, and I kept going
Hmm.
like, okay, like I am not going to lay down and just be like totally defeated over this situation. I'm going to figure it out, and I just kept taking each step, or maybe getting up each time I fell down, whatever. But yeah, I totally I
It's
love that message.
it's so interesting that you say that, and I want to make this point too. I don't think anyone should minimize whatever their challenge is, because your challenge is your challenge. It could be whatever it is. It could be the fact that you just can't do another day the way you're doing a day.
Yeah.
And that's, that's just as that weighs on people just as heavily when that's your challenge. So I don't want anybody to think that they can't claim the need to find their resilience and to
Yeah.
find their brilliance because, life's hard. And whether you're going through a major crisis or whether you just can't do this anymore the way you've been doing it, it helps to know that there are steps and processes and things that you can work through again, one step by one step. And here's the other thing that I really want to drive home to people, and you will be able to relate to this. Do not be married to outcomes. You can't institute a step and think, well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to give up. Because guess what? Odds are it isn't going to work. At
Yeah.
least not the first time you introduce it. You're going to have to evolve with situations. And that's another thing that I had to learn. You have to evolve with what's going on and whatever is going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So are all of you said this, you think this is your sixth book. Are all of your books kind of related to this topic, or are they all nonfiction? What kind of are all of the books that you've written? Are they related to your business?
Well, it's interesting because when I first started writing all these, so my son, again, his I knew he was in trouble for a while. I just, distraction and denial were my best friends. I just, pretend I didn't see something that was too hard to see. Another thing we want to stay away from. Um, but the first couple of books that I wrote were they were light in tone. They were I called them my Not Ready for Granny Panties book. That was the first book. The 11 Commandments for Avoiding Granny Panties. That was the first one. And the second one was the Woman's Book of Dirty Words, which was not dirty words like you think, but it was words like relax and, vacation, things that mean a whole other thing to women. That being said, they were all about, if you kind of look for a theme, and then the other one was the 15-minute master, which was more directly related to getting through things 15 minutes at a time. But they were all about this intentional mindset that we really need to develop if we're not going to just be in a little ping pong, game or whatever, bouncing from place to place. We have to develop an intentional mindset. So they're all of a sort of central theme, but depending on what I'm focusing on, different major pieces to each of them.
Wow. Well, they all sound like they're inspiring for women, which is, I'm so glad that we found each other because that's exactly what I want this podcast to be. So I think all of your books sound like ones that my audience would probably be interested in. So tell me about what led you to write that first book. I mean, they say like everyone has I've heard the saying that everyone has a book in them somewhere. So what was calling you to write that in the first place?
Well, I started as a newspaper columnist. I started
Oh,
writing for
wow.
smaller newspapers, and I loved Irma Bombeck, who is, I read her a lot when I was a kid, and I found something so interesting and charming and funny about the absurdity that she would pick out of everyday situations. And I mean, you're a mom and you're a woman, and at any point in our day we can look at something and go, "Oh, really? Like really? Like that's happening right now?" So it helped me in my columns to turn those absurdities into something funny because, otherwise you're just going to tear your hair out all day. So that actually was my first book, was a compilation of those newspaper columns. And then from there, again, I began to see as life got a little more complicated, the need to, for my own sanity, to get out in writing these ideas about how I was not going to assign myself to the granny panties role, the old lady role. Like, no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. And, again, how to find some lightness in just everyday stuff because boy, it can really wear you down.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what it was. It was how can I find lightness and just I also realized that people listen if you make them laugh. So humor is a huge connector and
Yeah.
every writer wants to connect with people. So for me, that was part of it. It was how can I get these kind of lessons across without being preachy? So you be funny, and that's how it works.
I love it. Well, so tell me about your publishing. So with all of those books, have you taken the same approach to publishing them, or did you publish them in different ways?
I've always self-published for one major reason. I have no patience. That is, God's just skipped right over me in the patience department. I've got none. The whole idea of query letters and this long, arduous process that traditional publishing takes, it can take, if you're lucky to find a publisher, it can take 2 to 3 years to get a
Yeah.
book from written to published.
Yeah.
I don't I don't have the time or the patience for that. So when self-publishing first started many years ago, I was like, well, I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it for me is having complete control over how I want to do it. The peril of it is having complete control because if you screw
All
it
falls
up,
on
it's
you.
on you. Yeah, it's on you.
Yep.
Um, but again, it gave me control over it. I could write what I wanted. I could format it the way I wanted. And I could put it out on my own terms and my own
Yeah.
schedule.
Yeah.
Now, all that being said, you can still submit those books to big publishers if you want to.
Yeah.
So, there's still that option to do that. But again, with this world of the internet and all being what it is, traditional publishers are looking for a following. They want you to have a following. They're not going to just invest in anybody who comes along and says, "Hey, guess what? I've written this book and it's great." They want to know that you have a following. So self-publishing is also a way to build a following for yourself, whether it's through, blogs. You should always have your own website if you want to self-publish a book, and continue to build, with excerpts from your book and ideas and thoughts, build that through social media. So anybody that wants to do that, and again, I would advise for self-publishing. It's a great outlet.
Mhm.
But you do have to be, again, intentional and thoughtful about it. And as you said, build that as a business.
Mhm.
That's it. It
Yeah,
has to be that.
those are really great tips for anyone who is just getting into this world or just thinking about, what approach to take with publishing their book. The So the nice thing is that with anything, you mentioned like if you screw anything up, it's on you, right? But the nice thing is nowadays, like, I'm so old, but
I
is
am. So,
well, and so I was actually in the publishing world before. So I ran a publishing company for 10 years. And back then, when I started there, which was in 2007, self-publishing was not very common. You had to go through, a vanity publisher is what they called it, vanity
mhm.
press, to get your book published. And there was a lot of stigma around it. And nowadays, it's not like that anymore.
No.
So many people self-publish their book. Like people don't even think about it.
Hmm.
But the other thing I was going to say is like also if you do anything, like if you look back and there you find an error in the book, it's easy to fix these days.
It
Like if
is.
you decide you want to change the cover, easy to do. You can add a chapter, you can, all of those things. Doesn't have I just am a big believer in the oh gosh, I'm just forgetting her name now. She was the COO of Facebook. She might still be, I'm not sure, but
Oh,
um
Sally, I can't even think her last name
I know
myself.
it's an S.
I know who it is. Yeah, of course. We're not old.
Anyways, her done is better than perfect was one of
Yes.
her quotes, right? And that I'm a big believer in that quote. Like even though my personality is I'm a perfectionist, but I still believe done is better than perfect. Get it out there, and then if you want to fix it later, you can do that. It's okay. You can always go back and
It's always easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So just, I agree with you. Get it out there. Um, and if people want to hear what you're going to say, you have to get it out there. To sit around on your hands and sit around and wait for something to come to you, first of all, it's just not necessary. It's not
right.
necessary anymore. And to your point, you can go back, you can fix it, you can add chapters, you can do your own additions. And again, all of that is about building your credibility, building your audience. And, at some point, if you want to submit to a bigger publisher, and if you're big enough, if you're starting to develop that buzz on social media and all that, they'll find you. So it's very doable,
Yeah.
and it's very gratifying. I would say this. Don't go into it thinking you're going to be the next J.K. Rowling, because you're probably not. You know, um, do it because you have something to say, something that you want to share. Do it as a part of a bigger
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
but don't think that you're going to self-publish a book and be a millionaire. Hey, you might be the lucky person, but odds are you won't be.
Yeah.
Buy a
Chances are
lottery ticket, you might have a better shot at that.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's really again why I wanted this podcast. It's getting that message out there, and it's not about selling a million copies or even necessarily hitting the bestseller list. It's about getting your message out to the people who need to hear it, and that may be a smaller group of people than the entire world like J.K. Rowling, but it's
Yeah.
about getting it out to that group of people, and that's where you're going to have the most impact.
Yeah.
Well, I would love for you to share. So I will link to your book in the show notes, but also where is your platform? Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
So I actually have two websites. I'm directing people to the brilliantlyresilient.net right now. They will be somehow co-joined at some point because I'm doing a lot of shifting and changing. And that's the other thing. You always have to be prepared to move things around when you're in that world because things change very
Things
quickly.
change fast. Yep.
And I also have maryfranbontempo.com. They have very similar content. All of my books are available on both of them. All of the books are available on Amazon. You can find them there. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. It's usually under maryfranbontempo.com. But if you look up Brilliantly Resilient, somehow or another, the powers that be will link us together.
Great. Well, I know you and I found each other on LinkedIn, or I should say, I found you, not not vice versa, but I found you on LinkedIn. So, yeah, thank you so much for engaging in a conversation with me and then coming on to the show. So, thanks, Mary Fran. It was great to get to know your story a little bit, and I can't wait to read your books. Thanks so much for being
Kelly,
on.
I appreciate it. It's been a great conversation, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to talk to smart women. So thank you again.
For a community of women writers to support and inspire you on your journey, join the Author Power Circle. Connect weekly with fellow authors, stay accountable, and move your book forward in an encouraging community. Learn more at kellyshuckneck.com.